So let me begin by saying hello, everyone, and welcome to Ibi Speaks. My name is Ibinabo Enebi, and March is a month that I have dedicated to women, and I am continuing my self-empowerment series for the month. The series is about helping you to rediscover yourself so that you can gain the freedom to live your best life. And now, if you're feeling stuck, or you feel you're in a rut, or you feel lost and you're hoping to start something fresh and take charge of your life, then you shouldn't miss any of our episodes. In this self-empowerment series, I will be covering several themes. Last week, we talked about placing value on yourself. And this week, we're dealing with the topic coping with the loss of a child. And I wanted to do this episode for three reasons. First, to encourage those who are currently experiencing the pain of losing a child or a loved one. And the second reason is to provide the tools, give them tools that they could use in helping them to go through the process and to rediscover, their dreams and their vision and their zest for life. And then the third also then is to teach people how to empathize with someone who's lost a loved one. And sometimes, we may think that we're helping someone, but we may come across as being insensitive in a way. So we're going to talk about the right way to go about encouraging and helping somebody. And so to talk about this topic are two guests. One of them is a mom who watched her daughter alongside 60 other young girls die in a plane crash in Nigeria in 2005. That thing was a national disaster. And my guest is Obianama Egbosimbo. Obie, did I get it right?
Nope. Obianama Egbosimbo.
Sorry, I can't see properly. Wow. Obianama Egbosimbo. She's an entrepreneur and the founder of Nonny's Children's Shop, a top-tier children's shop in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. She's a member of Faith Foundation and serves as a mentor for emerging entrepreneurs. And my second guest is a certified advanced grief recovery method specialist whose job is to train people struggling with grief on how to resolve it resourcefully. And she's no stranger to loss and grieving as well. She's Gulam Fernandez. So hello.
Oh.
You're welcome, ladies. And just a quick one now. So I'd like to thank everyone who's joined me today, and I'm delighted that you're all here. And I want to say that I'm highly appreciative of the fact that you're here. I want to say thank you very much. And if you're a first-time viewer, I want to say thank you. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. It's Ibinabo Enebi. And you can be a part of this conversation by leaving your comments in the comment box below if you're watching via Zoom. And if you're watching via YouTube, you can leave your comments in the comment section. And you can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Ibinabo Enebi. You can follow me on Facebook, or my Facebook page is Ibinabo Enebi. And you can also check on my website. I have some very interesting reads from guest writers and myself. And my website is onewomanity.com, but I have just recently changed it to ibinaboenebi.com. So just check it out. So Obie, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
And I want to start by saying that I'd like to say that if at any time, in any moment of this conversation, you want to take a pause, just let me know. Yeah. And this is a safe space for all of us. And so if there are certain things you don't want to talk about, you don't have to talk about it. But then I just want to say that I'm really, really appreciative of the fact that that you're here, that you want to do this, and I'm very happy. So first, I want to say congratulations on securing a franchise for the multinational manufacturing company Mattel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a big deal. Is the franchise just in Nigeria or the whole of West Africa or Africa?
It's just in Nigeria with a business partner. So I have a partner. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And how does that impact your business?
Well, it just means that we get the new toys first.
Yeah.
So we're like leading that here. And the franchise of Mattel is particularly good because they have a lot of the kids popular brand under them. Fisher Price, Barbie, Hot Wheels. So it's huge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you have good quality as well, yeah?
Yeah, excellent quality. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Obie, your children's shop is named after your daughter, Nonny, and it's been almost 17 years since the day, since that event happened. And, the plane crash that claimed the lives of your daughter alongside 60 other young girls, and as well as a prominent Nigerian female preacher. So for our viewers who don't really know the backstory, do you mind telling us what happened on that day?
Okay, I'll correct what you said. It was boys and girls. Because
boys and girls.
Yes, Loyola Jesuit College, Abuja, is a mixed school.
Oh.
Yeah, so they were coming home. They were house in Abuja, Nigeria. It's a Jesuit college in Abuja. So typically on that flight, you will have kids that live in Port Harcourt and the environs. So you had kids that lived also in places like Aba. There were some kids that lived in Aba, which is very close to Port Harcourt. So it was Christmas holiday and they were coming home on holiday. And that day, the flight was delayed for so long. So the kids were actually in the airport in Abuja for a very long time because the flight couldn't take off as scheduled because there was environmental sanitation. That, if you're not a Nigerian, means that in some cities in Nigeria, some Saturdays, businesses start at 10 and not earlier because the government expects everybody to clean up your surroundings, not just, so that flight was delayed and they eventually left. And on landing in Port Harcourt, technical issues, the plane caught fire. And a lot of us parents, as expected, were at the airport waiting to receive our kids. And it was, I know I'm a Nigerian, I'm a proud Nigerian, but it showed me what we were as a people because the plane crashed, the Sosoliso staff on ground took off their uniforms and took off. And eventually help came after a long while. And some kids were rescued and taken to hospitals. First of all, the first point of contact was the health facility at the airport before the teaching hospitals, which would have been typically like a 1 hour, 15, 20 minutes drive. So it was a harrowing experience. But like I told Ibi, in sharing this, I cannot leave my faith out of what I saw and how I went through it. Because that day at the airport, I am one of those people I've always known and believed that there's a God. There is no doubt in any part of me that there is a God. So that day, in all the noise, and unfortunately or fortunately, I had my 2 younger children and my old parents-in-law, God bless their memory. On that day, they went with me to the airport to pick my daughter. So in the midst of all that confusion, I was able to just pull away. And there's this thing I say it's like I invoke or talk to God one-on-one. I just moved to a corner. And I was like, God, as much as I know that you are alive and that you are my God, is as much as I understand that I'm at Port Harcourt Airport waiting to pick my 11-year-old daughter. And I don't really care what's happening here because I know you're God. Can I have my daughter? I need to leave. And there was silence. I kept on saying that. And I heard God audibly say, so as much as you know that I am your God and I am alive, is as much as you do not know that there is a heaven and there is a hell. And I looked. I'd never, before that day, heaven and hell were not 2 tangible places to me. But from that day going forward, they have become real places. Just like I know I'm in Lagos, Nigeria. Golan, you are in England, Ibi is in Ireland, is as much as heaven and hell are two tangible places to me. And I go, no, God, I know there's a heaven and a hell. Then he goes, if you know that, then what you should be doing at this moment is praising me and bringing worship to me, because where they are is they've come home to me. And at that point, it was like my mind's eye opened, and I didn't particularly see my daughter, but I saw kids trooping into, well, I didn't see what the kids were seeing, but I could see the reactions the kids had to what they were seeing as they walked in. And I can't even describe what I saw, because even if you took a child from a village in Nigeria to Disney World, I don't think the excitement that I saw or the reaction from the kids would be equal to that. They were really excited, happy. So I saw that, and God said, you should be praising me, because if you truly believe that there is a heaven and a hell, and I've now told you that this is where they've come to heaven, then it's something that you should give praise to me for. So this first experience meant that I experienced the grace of God while at the airport, and through it all, the grace of God. And again, I'll say that most people think grace of God is undeserved favor. I beg to differ from that definition. For me, the grace of God is for you to be empowered by his presence to begin to see things the way he sees, or to begin to see yourself the way he sees you. God never sees any of us in whatever situation we're in as victims. He never views us as victims. So that was what I experienced. And then I'm putting it very simply. The grace of God is his power over you, not to enable you see what you're going through as ordinary eyes see it. You're empowered to see it like he sees it. So you don't feel the full impact of what has befallen you or what is before you in the flesh. You see it in the spirit. And that is one thing I enjoyed throughout the grieving period. There were times I cried. The treatment we got at the airport, when we were finally allowed to go to the teaching hospital, I think just one child survived. The bodies of our children were not kept in any decent manner. Port Harcourt is the garden city and is still the oil capital of Nigeria. Did not have enough, medical care. The mortuaries were full. The bodies of children were just left outside on the bare floor. So it was a lot. It was a harrowing experience. So that's basically what we saw. Some of the bodies of the kids were not identified. I, in particular, between my family and another family, the first corpse we saw identified as my daughters. Another family now shows up and felt it was their daughters. We didn't have the opportunity, the privilege of having DNA test kits. So there was a lot that went on. There was a whole lot. So that's basically what happened. And some bodies were not identified. Some kids were buried in mass graves. So those of us that were lucky and eventually were able to identify our children, it was actually a privilege to have their corpse to bury where you wanted. So that's basically it. Then the journey of the healing began.
Before we get to that, I just want us to take it in steps, because you see,
okay,
words fail me, because I know you are my friend, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that when it happened, I called you. I wasn't in Nigeria when it happened. My husband came to see you, and,
yes.
And I called you. And when I called you, I just felt that you were numb.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't even remember that I called you. So that would have been, so you had experienced the supernatural comfort of God, but then you had to come down, to the reality that she was no longer here with us. But then we're going to get to that. But I just want to ask a question, because like a mother, Prior to the accident, did you feel any premonition that something was going to happen?
Yes, God talks, Ibi. I remember because of my store, then my store was in Port Harcourt. I had some things to do for the store in Lagos. My parents live in Lagos. I remember distinctly having a dream, a not so good dream about my daughter. So I was worried that she was ill. I called a teacher in the school and they told me, oh no, she's fine. We saw her. She's looking forward to coming home. I remember the Spirit of God then telling me, fly to Abuja, pick your daughter, fly to Lagos and do what you have to do in Lagos, and then fly back to Port Harcourt. But it didn't make any sense to me. I just thought of going to pick a child from boarding school with all the buckets, all the things, flying to Lagos. She's still dislocated, and keeping her in my parents' house or being there, then flying. So yes, I felt there was something wrong, but I didn't understand what was wrong. The thought of going to Abuja, picking my daughter, flying to Lagos, then flying to Port Harcourt. If normally all the time she had come back the other previous holidays, either myself or my husband would be there to pick her up, myself or her father. But this was the first time none of us went to come back with her, because another close family friend of ours, whose daughter was also in school and was also very close to my daughter, he happened to be in Abuja and offered to go pick them from school, take them to the airport and check them in and wait until the flight took off. So you get those things, but sometimes for whatever reasons, you don't process well.
Oh my gosh. So, it is so eerie that, that you actually had a clear instruction that said to you, go get your daughter from Abuja, fly her back.
No, fly to Lagos.
Fly to Lagos and then fly back to Port Harcourt as well. Anyways, now, a friend of mine described losing a child as being shot in the chest, and the pain differs from losing a parent or losing a sibling or losing a spouse, because when you lose a child is different from all of those. And I've got a few friends also that have lost their children as well, and but then I was just looking through your. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I was just looking through your WhatsApp, and I just peeped through your WhatsApp, and I see you on your status with your children and with, just being happy. How did you get, so this brings me back to the grieving process. So how did you get from somebody who when I called you was dazed to the woman now who's just smiling and happy and living life?
Like I said, when losing a child is the worst kind of loss, at least from my perspective, because like I tell you, that is the one loss that the English dictionary doesn't have a name for you. If you lose a parent or lose both parents, you become an orphan. If you lose a wife, you become a widower. If you lose a husband, you're a widow. But when you lose a child, the world doesn't define you. But at those times when you've lost something as precious as a child, it's like God's ear or God is really by your side. And every question you ask is answered with so much love and kindness that love and kindness can only but envelope you and move you forward. It's like as parents, sometimes you think your child did something and you either scold or you spank, only to find out you reacted too quickly or that the punishment you gave out was not commensurate to the action. So, as we parents begin to pamper or overcompensate that child, I think that's what I experienced, because God became really tangible and present. And before then, I knew God. I was born a Catholic. my mother Anglican. In the course of my mother's life, she became Pentecostal. When I got married, I remained a Catholic. But after the loss of my child, I couldn't deal with the loss of my child as a Catholic. I'm not here to say one faith is better than the other, but I remember one day, I kept on saying, God, I can't do this, I can't do this. And he goes, you know me two ways. You've always worshiped me two methods. It took me time to realize that what he was saying was the Pentecostal where I knew him and the Catholic where I knew him. So he goes, you've tried this way, it's not working. Why don't you come this way? So I swung back to Pentecostalism fully at that point. And I was hearing him and asking questions, and he was answering. I had a lot of help. Like I would say, okay, even if my daughter was to die, why this kind of death? Why a plane crash? Why fire? Why such a horrific way to die? And then when I started with that question, I had a dream. I saw my daughter and she looked well. And in the dream I went to her, I was so happy to see her, hugging, kissing. And I said, oh, you're well. Why did they keep telling me you were in the plane crash? Then my daughter turned and I could see the plane as I saw it at the airport on that day. And she goes, Mommy, I don't know what happened to that plane. I was amongst the first to go. I was amongst the first to go. I don't know what happened to the plane. I took that. After the crash, I had another child who was ready for boarding school. And just like a lot of parents who had children on the plane that had another child, you know how we have our first two children pretty. We didn't feel safe or comforted enough to start sending them out to schools outside Port Harcourt. So there was a lady that started a brand new boarding, trying to meet up the standards we were looking for that wasn't readily available in Port Harcourt. So a lot of those children, those siblings went to this boarding house. And the first year, the first memorial of their death, the school and the owner had the empathy and presence of mind to organize grief counseling sessions for the siblings. And while they were in the room talking, the person taking the session now told them, does anybody have anything to share and anything to say? My son happened to be in that group. And another boy got up and said, oh, that he used to be so worried about how his brother died, but that a reverend father friend of his family came and told them some months ago when he went home that their son appeared to him and said, please tell my parents that I and another girl called Chinonye were amongst the first to go. We were not there. So my son comes home after God has told me this and tells me this story. So I got a lot of comfort. Every question I asked those times were answered speedily. So what I tell people now going through harrowing loss is you have the ears of God. Begin to ask those questions or ask for those things that you think is impossible. They would come to pass. So by the time I got that comfort, that was comfort. Then I had so many. Then I'll say, oh God, even if my daughter was supposed to die, why 11? Why not 25, 30, 40, 50? I mean, we're all going to die. Why so fast? And I heard God say, 1,000 years for me, 1,000 years for you is like but a day before me. I love you all so much that none of you is going to live longer than a day here on earth. I don't exist in time. You are confined and you exist in time. And stop saying that you lost a daughter. You have banked one child safe in heaven. So the question lies now on how you're going to make it there and how you're going to come here also. So It's a long walk. There are days you cry, but he answers the questions you ask.
Obie, I don't want you to stop talking. And I'm going to ask you this, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it possible not to open your heart to receive the comfort of God's love? Because there are some people who are experiencing loss, but who are refusing to open their hearts to God's comfort.
It's possible. That's why when you asked me to talk about this, I told you I could not speak about this different from my faith. Because when you've accepted God as your only, when you've accepted as a Christian, a believer in Christ, what you're saying in effect is that it's no longer Ibi or it's no longer Obie that lives. It's Christ living in you. So you have to have that understanding. And I am a doer. I'm somebody that likes to get things done. You know, I'm a hard worker. If I can do it, I will do it. So whenever I come to the end of myself, and I tell people that's the best place for me, where I know myself has to stop. Obie, you cannot do anything about this. It's beyond you. So what I do is that it's like I that thing that is before me, I carry it both in the spirit and in the physical, and I lay it down at the feet of Jesus. I prostrate myself there and say, God, this is beyond me. I can't do this. I need you. And at that point, I just rely on him because I've come to the end of myself. There's no way you can fix this. And also, when this happened, because growing up in Nigeria, I have met people that have lost children in the course of my life. And I always saw in those people that they never recovered. With all due respect to grief, it's like you see them, you can tell that, yes, they've lost a child. A light leaves because your child is the only person that if you're asked, you know, when we all cry at the graveside, I think it's only your child that if you're asked, even in the tears, can this person come up and you will go in without thinking about it, you would go. It's only your child you can do that for. So I've lost what I was trying to say. So when you come to the end of yourself, I knew I couldn't do it by myself, Ibi. It would have killed, it would have broken me. It would have meant that it is written on my face. So I also went to God and said, God, you asked us to be testimonials. You asked us to testify of your goodness. Our lives are supposed to testify of your goodness. I don't want everybody that sees me, because I'm so sad, to read instantly that I've lost a child. I want it to be my story for me to tell to who I want, how I want, and when I want. So let it be my testimony. That's why it's called a testimony. I need to testify. It shouldn't be written all over my face and my countenance. I remember those were one of the prayers I prayed. And he granted me that if you meet me, if I don't tell you I've lost my child, you wouldn't know. But I tell you that there is no day here on earth that I don't remember my child. It's impossible not to.
Wow, Obie, I listen. I just want to applaud you for this, to be honest, because you are just encouraging me.
God, it's not me.
Yeah. So I thank you very much. So I just want to go to Gulam now. Gulam, you've listened to Obie, and I've heard everything she has said. Loss isn't new to you also. Earlier on in your life, you too suffered some losses. Would you mind sharing that experience with us as well?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Obie, for sharing so freely from your heart. And one thing I would say is that every person's experience of grief is unique, because the person they've lost was unique. And so we often say that it's, we have to treat each person as somebody who's on a unique journey, because sometimes we start comparing our loss to somebody else. And I have a variety of clients who've come from a variety of backgrounds. And sometimes when they've heard my story about all my losses, they say, oh, mine's really not that much. I feel like I shouldn't be sharing because you've been through so much. I say, no, each person's loss. I mean, one person may have lost a dog, and what that dog meant to them might be something really, really special. Maybe, there are lots of memories attached there. And they might say, oh, but I've only just lost a dog and Obie's lost her child. How can I? But no, it doesn't work that way, because everybody feels grief at 100%, whatever the loss is. And loss obviously isn't always just about people dying. We say that there are over 40 life events that can impact your heart and cause you feelings of loss and grief. And that grief is not only negative, it's accumulative. So Obie has lost, that is devastating, to lose your child under those circumstances. And it's so encouraging to hear how her faith has sustained her. For some people, they might react in that situation with it breaking their faith, because they can't get over the fact that God has allowed something like that, and their experience of faith might be very different. Some people find faith because they realize that trying to deal with the situation in their own strength is impossible. They realize that, they thought they were strong, but what they're dealing with is so overwhelming. They realize they need someone outside of themselves. So with the grief recovery method, which I'll talk about in a moment, although people who originally designed it had faith, it's been designed in a way that it can help people whether they have no faith, a different faith, or little faith. So that's the really encouraging thing about it, that there is hope for everybody wherever they are on their faith journey. In terms of my own grief journey, it started, before I share, I would like to just remind you that I am talking from a position of strength and a position of having come through it, because when people first hear, they can really feel overwhelmed by it, because it sounds like my life is such a tragedy because there were so many losses. And that's not the truth. The truth is that my life has gone through some very difficult phases, and I have learnt much and explored much, and I wish I'd known some things earlier, so I didn't waste so much time being stuck in the pain of grief. But I am sharing today as a beacon of hope, not from a position of being overwhelmed or being hopeless. So my first experience of loss was my mum. She was going to go on holiday to Pakistan. She was a very devout Muslim. She wanted to go to Hajj and see her family. She hadn't seen them for 7 years. And she just got it in her head that she was going. And people said, your children are so young, how can you leave them? But somebody had told her that if you died in this country, they would cut you up, they would put you in a freezer. And she was like horrified. That was something she really, really was worried about. And just as she was leaving, I had this sudden overwhelming urge to tell her that I love her and give her a hug. And I don't know if that was a premonition or what, but I just remember suddenly this surge of overwhelming desire to do that. But then I looked at all the people who come to say goodbye to her. And I remember my logical brain saying, oh, don't make a fuss. She'll be back in 6 weeks. So I held that back. I didn't say that to her. And obviously, she didn't come back in 6 weeks. She died while she was away on holiday. And that made it even more complicated because we never got to see her at the funeral or see that she had really died. So part of my coming to terms with that she really had died was difficult because I would have a nightmare. And in my nightmare, she would turn up and she'd say, oh, no, your dad and I had a bit of a argument. I just wanted to stay a bit longer. I didn't really die. And obviously in my dream, it was so real. I was convinced she was back and she hadn't died. And then I would wake up and she had died. And so it got to a point where in my dream, it sounds ridiculous now, but in my dream, I'd be pinching myself and I'd be thinking, oh no, this time it's really real because I just pinched myself. I am awake. I'm not asleep, but then I would wake up and realize. So that, you know, and the second thing that was very unhelpful, I was the oldest girl. I can't remember who it was, but somebody leant forward and said, don't cry. You've got to be strong for your brothers and sisters. And so I took that on board, and I thought that's what I had to do. So I didn't actually deal with my own grief. And every time I felt like crying, I would tell myself, she did it the one time, but I was so busy trying to please her and do the right thing. I'd be telling myself, I mustn't cry. I've got to be strong for my brothers and sisters. So in the grief recovery method, we often talk about the misinformation and the myths that can keep us stuck with our pain. And one of them is, you know, I've got to be strong, or somebody tells you you've got to be strong for somebody or for your work or for your children or for your family. And that means you're not dealing with your grief. You're actually putting it on hold while you're busy trying to be strong. So some of these things sound they sound like common sense. It sounds like it makes sense. Sounds like it's a true thing, but actually we call it a myth. And in the grief recovery method, we talk about the 6 key myths that can keep us stuck. So my next big loss was when I was around 30, and my older brother, he was about 1.5 years older than me. He died very suddenly from a massive heart attack. Wow. And I'd seen him 2 weeks earlier. We had no idea in those days what the symptoms of a heart attack were. He was only 1.5 years older than me, and it just completely shook up my world, because I used to believe that old people die and other people die. So now suddenly, just like that, my brother was gone, and that came as just such a shock. It's really hard to believe. Are you sure? It can't be, you know, I saw him 2 weeks ago. I thought maybe he'd had an accident, but they said no, he had collapsed, and then by the time he got to hospital, and then they did an autopsy and realized he must have had some problem metabolizing fats, because they said that his arteries were very old, like an old man's. They were furred up like an old man. A year later, my younger sister had a delayed grief reaction. She looked, all of us were all falling apart, because there was the grief from my mum that we hadn't dealt with, and then this sudden loss from and because my brother, because he was so close to me in terms of age, it then raised up my own fears about death and dying. Because I couldn't think old people die and other people. I was suddenly like, oh, where are they? What's happened to them? I'd always believed in God, because I believe that there's a creator God, because there's creation everywhere. But I was brought up as a Muslim. And so I suddenly found myself really struggling from a faith point of view. I started having a nightmare where there was a big pair of scales, and it was as if my good deeds were being weighed and my bad deeds were being weighed. And I never knew from one night to the next, was I going to go to heaven or was I going to go to hell? And as a Muslim, they're very, very vivid images about what happens to you if you're going to hell. And it was, you know, really horrifying. So sometimes I would wake up in a sweat, just anxious and worried about, you know, what's going to happen to me. I became really afraid of dying. If I had to go for any operation or anything, I'd be really fearful. What if this is the last? What if I never wake up? What if this is it? So that kick-started me on a search and a quest to try and make sense of is there a God? What's he like? Where have they gone? And I decided to give up my job and go traveling. But in the meantime, my younger sister, she had a delayed grief reaction. She had a mental breakdown. She started becoming suicidal, and it was really difficult to know what to do. I'd already given up my job. I'd bought my ticket. But then she came back to being herself, and she said, no, you really need to go. You know, you must go because you really need this. And she persuaded me to go, because I wanted to take her with me, but I'd never traveled to India. And so I wasn't sure what the facilities would be like or what help she could get. Anyway, I got a message saying that she'd had a relapse. I should head back. So I left there. She was alive. By the time I landed, she'd walked out of the hospital that she was in, and she had had another go at, taking her life, and this time she had succeeded. So again, that came as a big shock, but in a different way, because with some deaths you're left with what if I hadn't gone? What if I'd taken her with me? What if I had persevered in trying to call her to say I was heading back? In those days, we're talking over 30 years, it's really difficult to make phone calls. It's amazing that we're talking here and you're in Ireland and you're in Nigeria and so on. But in those days, it was really difficult. And I remember trying to get through because I wanted to say, look, I'm coming back, hang in there. I'm feeling much stronger. I'll be able to help you. Anyway, but I couldn't get through. And I remember, again, that logical part of myself saying, oh, you're going to see her tomorrow. Don't worry about it. You'll see her tomorrow. But sadly, by the time I arrived back, she'd already died. So that was really challenging. And then after that, the following year, my father became very unwell because he was devastated having lost 2 of his children. And then he died. And then later on, I went on to have 3 miscarriages. My husband had always wanted to have girls. And so, the first miscarriage was at a very early stage. So there was not much progress. But the second 2 happened quite late on. The first one was around 20 weeks. And the second one was around 22, 23 weeks. In fact, they'd said if the baby and I had been able to carry on a bit longer, then they could have tried to save her as an immature baby. But we just hadn't realized that I had a weak cervix and she was beautifully formed, but she just came too early. So bereavement of various kinds and I, have traveled together. And as I said, it meant that I've explored many things here and there, trying to find answers. And in terms of the faith, I went from fear to faith, because eventually I realized that actually I couldn't come to terms with all of this in my own strength. I needed someone outside of myself. And people started sharing with me about who Jesus was, why he came, why he died, and that I needed a savior. And it was amazing that once I actually put my faith in Jesus, my fear of death and dying literally just vanished like that. All my nightmares stopped, my fear of death and dying stopped. Hallelujah. And so that's been a whole different journey. But in terms of going from grief to recovery, again, I tried many, many new age therapies. I went for counseling, many things I tried. And I became passionate about helping people in their journey so that they wouldn't get stuck for years and years like I had. And I came across the grief recovery method. It's very different from counseling. Most counseling and therapies are talking therapies, whereas this is a very structured step-by-step process that teaches you the knowledge, the tools, and the processes that you need in order to handle grief resourcefully for yourself. And once you've been through the program, then you've got those knowledge, tools, and processes for life, so that not only can you use them to deal with the old grief, but then you are well-resourced to deal with future grief.
No, fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic, Philip. And I don't mean to cut you short, but you see,
it's fine. We've got
because I'm just learning, and I want us to take the whole conversation systematically. So I just want to ask you another question, because you've had various experiences with grief and all of that. So what is the immediate impact of grief on someone's life?
Well, I often say that it's like PMS.
Okay.
So P stands for the physical aspects, and then M is for the mental, emotional aspects, and then S is for the spiritual aspects. So it can end up people becoming losing their productivity because they can become forgetful and struggle to focus, struggle to make decisions. They can all sorts of physical things. They can start developing various physical problems because of all the stress and the shock that they're in. And then it can have a spiritual impact in that sometimes. So for example, someone I know, he was, he lost someone, and just before he found out that they'd actually died, he was crying out and saying, God, if you save this, person, I will follow you and I'll give my life to you and I'll do this and I'll do that. The thing is that by the time he started praying that prayer, that person had already died. And he'd never been a person of faith, so he didn't even know who he was praying to. So when he heard that news, his first reaction was, I'll never forgive God, and almost like blaming God for what had happened. So it can have people, everybody is unique. Some people go into being strong and you wouldn't think that they'd been through something amazingly terrible, and they'll just put on a front and it's all going on inside. Some people might just find themselves crying endlessly, but feeling that they shouldn't, so they're constantly trying to stop themselves. And because they feel that other people might not like them crying, they'll start isolating themselves and grieving alone. So in terms of the 6 common myths, we often say that, that there's people will often say things like, oh, don't feel bad, don't cry. And then they'll say something which actually could be some kind of platitude that's not very helpful. Or they could say something like, oh, you've just got to be strong. Or they might say, oh, just keep busy. That's another myth. That if you keep busy, then somehow it will distract you from what's happened. But the thing is, what's happened, you haven't dealt with the root cause of your pain. So some people get themselves exhausted trying to distract themselves from the pain, but it doesn't really solve what is going on. Another very popular myth is just give it time. Time's a healer, people will say. And that again sounds like it makes sense, but actually it's not time that's the healer, it's the steps that you take. So we often say to people, imagine if your car had a flat tire, how long would you have to wait for it to reflate itself? Well, it's not the time that's healing, it's the actions that you take. Do you know how to change the tire, or do you call for help? I haven't got a clue how to change a tire, so I would go, help.
Yeah, Gulam, I have to stop you here, but I'll come back to you because I want us to really tackle those steps afterwards. So, Obie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi.
So, Obie, so you've listened to Gulam, and she's talked about her own grieving process and what happened. And then can you relate to some of the things that she said in terms of the way people come across to you and say, you've got to be strong and stuff like that?
Yes, even I try to be. What she said is so true. I lost my daughter, but I had 3 other children. Yeah. And I was pregnant at the time. And I used to be so strong in front of my children, especially, the older 2 that were with me at the airport, thinking that was helping them. Only for my daughter, then she was 6. She comes to me one day and says, Mommy, didn't you love Nonny? And I said, oh, I do. I did it. I do. I will always love Nonny. Then she goes, but she's dead. Why are you not crying all the time? So that put my guard down. It made me understand that it will help my children, the ones left with me, their healing, they needed to see me break down, that I didn't need to put a front around them. So that, made that, what she said, you want to put up a front, you want to say it's okay. It made me realize that as a family, I needed to break down in front of my children, in front of my friends, and cry it out. So that encouraged that you needed to deal with, you lost your child, you were allowed to break down. But then I used to make it a point of duty not to cry in front of my children, thinking that showing them that weakness will make them, it will be hurtful to them. But they needed to see that. So what she's saying is right. There's a time to cry, even before God. Something happened.
And what about, the way people come to console you and they say, don't cry and stuff like that, because I remember that sometimes when you lose someone and people come to the house and they start telling you, what's the right way to console somebody?
The right way is to sit and be quiet. Your presence is enough. Then if it's somebody you're close to, just a touch, because like she said, there's physical pain. Just something as simple as holding somebody's hand and just rubbing it over, because there's that physical pain. Is like, the way another mother who lost her daughter too on the plane crash talked about it. She spoke in pidgin. I will try to speak, translate in English. She said, it be like say you lie down for quota and trailer run over you. That's literally speaking. She was saying that the physical pain is as much as, if you can imagine lying down on a tarred road and a huge trailer runs over you. So there's that pain. So your presence is more than enough. And simple things as rubbing the hand, rubbing the shoulder, a hug, it's enough. But I also want to encourage those of us that have been through grief, those people that come and tell you those things. I had to find empathy to understand they were not saying that to belittle what you're going through. They were saying that because that was what they thought could help. But now with this kind of program you've put up, Ibi, is educating people more. People are beginning to understand. Your presence is enough. You don't need to do or say anything.
Obie, my husband and I, we lost our adopted son 7 years ago. And when we were grieving, we were crying. And both of us sat down in our experience and we said to each other that now we know how to empathize with people that lose a loved one or a child.
Yes.
And it so happened that, he was on one of my shows last year, and we talked about how do we console someone that loses a child. And, and we came to the conclusion, both of us, that don't say anything, be there. Mm-hmm. So there was a neighbor of ours that lost his child. They lost their child in Canada. And we went to their house and we sat down with them. We talked about everything else, but not that. Because we knew that our presence was important to them. Because there are some things that people say to you that stab you. That stab you. So Gulam, I want to come back to you now, and I want solutions now, yeah? I want to talk about the solutions.
Thank you. So the first thing I would say, thank you, Obie, for sharing.
Thank you.
It's really important to understand that each person is unique. And so you don't want to think, oh, if I do this, this will help. If I do this, this will help everybody. So some people some people love to be stroked or touched because that comforts them. Some people, they have very strong boundaries and they don't really like to be touched, especially if they're grieving alone. So rather than making assumptions about what somebody wants, it's really good to just say, I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I love you. I want to show care. What will be the most helpful thing for you? What would you prefer me not to do? What would you prefer me to do? So you can say, would you like me to rub your back or to rub your hand? So give them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if we assume that what helps me is what will help somebody else, and then I've made that mistake in the past. I've thought, oh, well, what I would like is a hug. I've gone to give somebody a hug and they've gone, no, sorry, I don't do hugs. So you have to really, and it's not anything, we're all wired differently, we're all unique. For some people, they might have a lot of tears. For some people, they might have very little tears. And so if we think, oh, if they're crying, that means, that they're really mourning, or we can start making assumptions and judgments about how somebody is grieving. But the first thing is we need to go, each person is unique, their relationship is going to be unique. So watching, listening, noticing what gets you, what appears to comfort someone. And if you're not sure, you can just ask. The important thing is just be authentic and real. So you can say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. And sometimes for some people, just practical acts of kindness can mean a lot. It might be figuring out if they need some shopping, or because life is carrying on, but you're in a state of shock and not able to think clearly and not able to function sometimes. So people react very differently. It's interesting that when my brother died, we were a family of 6 children. Each person reacted differently to the loss and tried different ways of coping. So in terms of the 6 myths, obviously there's don't feel bad, there's keep busy, give it time, grieve alone or isolate yourself. People often think, if you're laughing, the world will laugh with you. And if you're crying, you should cry alone. But actually that is not helpful. That's not what you need. What you need is for somebody who's willing to just be, we call it, just be a heart with ears. Because if somebody is grieving, they're not broken. And they don't need you to fix them. But what the most healing thing is that they're able to tell their story, to be able to share their feelings. And you're just there as a heart with ears, that you're not judging, you're not questioning, you're not analyzing, you're not trying to come up with solutions. And sometimes because people are uncomfortable, what they'll do is they'll go, oh yeah, you start talking, and they jump in and start saying, oh, well, yeah, this is what happened to me and this is what helped me. And it becomes all about them. And sadly, sometimes because people feel uncomfortable and they're not sure what to say, they'll start avoiding the person. And you don't, you're already feeling isolated with your pain. You don't need people to start avoiding you. But what is helpful is if people are honest and real and happy to say, I can't even begin to imagine how you're feeling. It's very irritating when people go, oh yeah, I know how you feel. Well, we don't, because we're all different, and how we will respond is going to be very different. So I think on our side, when you're grieving, you need to kind of be really gracious, because often people mean well, but they can't do better because they don't know better. And that's why I think it's really important for us to, sort of get educated in this area. And if any of you are interested in some free resources, you can put in the chat box, yes, please, or you can private message me your details. And I have an ebook I can send you, which has got 62 tips on dealing with grief, helps you to understand some of the basics about what is grief. The problem isn't grief. The problem is usually unresolved grief. So those of you who were here earlier, I was talking about how when my mum went, I had that undelivered, unsaid communication, which is what was really paining me, because every time I thought about my mum, I'd think about the fact, why didn't I tell her that I loved her? Why did I assume that she would be back in 6 weeks? And sometimes we can become so preoccupied with the ending that it's almost like we get stuck at that point and we can't reconnect to all the good times that we had and all the fond memories that we had. And so the grief recovery method helps you to discover the unresolved grief that exists, and then find a way to actually deliver those communications and come to a point of completion. And as I said, there are a lot of resources out there. I'm very happy to book a free discovery call with people just so that I can find out what they need and point them in the right direction. What I do might not be for everybody. There might be other things, so depending on your grief journey and what you need, I'm very happy to point you to other resources.
Okay. Now I have a question here. I have two questions actually. Let me read it out. The first question is for Obie. Obie, did the loss affect the way you treated your other children in terms of discipline, allowing them to go out and giving them more freedom?
Yes, it did. In fact, now my older kids laugh about it. I've always been, what do my children call me? Helicopter mommy. So naturally I'm that way. I'm very protective of my children, and I invested a whole lot of myself in them. So after the loss of Nonny, I became even more protective. I won't allow my kids to go out with friends, who is driving. But over time, as they grew older, I had to, again, go to God and realize that if I trusted God enough and believed that he took Nonny home in his time, that I needed to leave these ones in the hands of God. Then in discipline, I'm also my mom is an 84-year-old school teacher. So I grew up my mom was a school teacher. I had a lot of discipline. And I had instilled that in the upbringing of my children. But after I lost Nonny, I didn't feel I needed to be so hard or so structured. And I remember God telling me, I said, you have banked one with me in heaven. What are you now doing? If you don't still continue to discipline, to teach, how will you bank the remaining 4? And he told me, he said, the things that you see are temporal. You keep saying, I have 4 children. I lost 1. Obie, you actually have 1 child in heaven. So you have to decide how many more you want to, show the way to heaven. So that made me understand that training, when God gives you children, you are called as a mother to train and lead them to find their way to God. And my younger sister said something to me some years back that only fortified that. She said, God has no grandchildren. So we always think our faith is all we need to move our children to God. Your faith is what you need to lead your children to God, their Father, because you can't represent your children. He's not seeing them as his grandchildren. Just as God is your Father, he's also Father. So you're called as a mother to lead them to that way, to find God for themselves and have him as their own Father. So that was what, put me back on full mommy duty. Not to overstate or to overprotect.
Wow. Obie, thank you so much for this. And Gula, you want to say something?
I was going to say that's a really important point. It's really important that we're being authentic and real with our children, and they see us in that way, because they will often model what we do. So if we go around being strong, hiding when we're crying, then that's what they think they need to do as a way of dealing with loss. So often we need to model what is healthy and let them know that actually loss happens and it's fine, to be upset. It's fine. There are sad times. Otherwise, if we protect them too much, then when something happens to them, they don't really know how to respond, and that can be really difficult.
Well, and I have this question for you, Gulem. It says that I hear this, that the loss of a child affects the couple. Some makes them close. Some of these losses make the couples close, while it pulls others apart. So if it is true, how can they walk through it together?
So again, I think So I'm thinking of a client, I won't go into obviously personal details, but they lost a child that was 3 years old. And the child leant against a window which had been left open because they'd done a pooey nappy or something. And then he fell out of this high up place and died. And so what happened was that he felt, I've got to be strong. And so he wasn't showing a lot of emotions because he thought, yeah, I've got to be strong. And she thought that he didn't care because he wasn't showing any emotions. And so they started to get into a blame frame. So he was kind of getting into blaming her, like, why did you leave this child, with our other children? Why didn't you look after the child yourself, and so on? And both of them were feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of regrets and all those sorts of things. And eventually, sadly, they did end up separating. So I think when something like that happens, you both have to understand that you can't change what has happened, but you can choose how you will actually respond to it and recognize when you need help. So if you're struggling, that there is a lot of help available out there, whether it's through books and videos and different websites where people are sharing their experiences, YouTube, or whether you need the specialist help where somebody's actually trained to take you through what's happening. And yes, so it's not always the case that because they lost a child, they're going to end up, some people, it does bring them closer because of how they respond, how they react. But especially if one person thinks the other one is to blame, then that can be really difficult. If you get into the blame frame mindset instead of, okay, this has happened, we can't change what has happened, how are we going to get through this? How can we support each other? And being outcome focused gives you much better quality of questions that you can use to start thinking, how can we best remember this son, or how can we do something as a legacy in on their memory? And there can be all sorts of things that can be done.
Outcome focused. Okay.
Yeah. So if you have a choice, you can focus on what actually happened when they died, or you can focus on the life that they had and be grateful. So we can develop a sense of gratitude for all the great things we had and balance it with the sadness we feel at how their life was cut short. But if you just focus on, like if Obie was just to focus on the plane crash rather than the, all the other years that she'd had and the great things. So sometimes for me, I struggled to get past that scene where my mum was just leaving and I ignored my heart. So once you discover there are things that you're kind of preoccupied with and you get help to resolve those things, then it's possible to really be able to have a full relationship that you then not only carry from the past to the present, but you then able to carry it forward with you and have those treasured memories with you for the rest of your life.
Okay, I have a question for you as well. Someone says here, so how do you release any guilty feeling you may have had after a loss, especially when you think there were things you should have done or not done?
So guilt is a really tricky one. Obviously, without knowing more details, it's difficult to say, but we often help the person to really look at the situation, because true guilt involves intention to harm. So you would ask yourself, was there a genuine intentional aspect to this where you intended to harm the person? So a better word to use often can be regret, having regrets about what we did do or we didn't do or wish we had done. And once you have identified those things, then it's actually finding the right tools and processes to be able to identify those moments and then process them. till you get a sense of completeness. Mostly the pain comes from having things that have been undelivered, things that have been unfinished, or where there's been an end to hopes and dreams and expectations. So when I had the miscarriage, I had all sorts of hopes and dreams and expectations of, what it would be like to have a daughter. I often say, oh, I've been, dominated by the men, because there's my husband plus 2 sons. Oh, it'll be nice to be able to go shopping. It'll be nice to be able to do this. So where you've got hopes and dreams and expectations, and they come to an end because the relationship has changed, or it's come to an end either through death or a divorce or moving or breakdown. There can be so many different things that cause things to come to an end. Sure.
You talk about regret. I had regrets. And I always wished I called my dad.
Yes.
Before he died. I always wished that I spoke to my mother-in-law before she died. It's not as though I wasn't calling them, but for some reason, towards the end of their lives, I didn't call as much as I should. So how do I deal with that regret?
So what I do when I'm working with clients is help them to do, first of all, we review the different losses that have impacted the person, and then we put them into an order of priority, and then we choose one relationship where we have feelings of unresolved grief. Is usually where we wish something had been different or better. There are things we wish we'd said, or there are things we wish we hadn't said, or wish we had done, we hadn't done. So the next step is we do a relationship review. And then in that, we try to identify what were the really good things, what were the difficult things, and are there things that have still unresolved and unfinished. And then we take you through the different tools and processes to help you finish them. So if anybody wants to know more about that, I'm very happy. You can private message me, or you can let Ibi know, and I can recommend some books, or I can, if you're interested in working with someone, I can talk about how that works as well.
Okay. I'm going to put all of those details after the video on my YouTube channel. Now, just quickly, while you're trying to type that, so it's gulam1uk@yahoo.co.uk, yeah? Gulam UK.
They just need to, so they just mention if they're saying yes, please, to the free resources, or if they would like to set up a free discovery call where we can talk a bit more about their personal situation, and then I can either talk about how we could work together, or I can signpost them to something that might be more relevant.
Okay, very good. So you can email her, and she's going to, she could have a free discovery call with you, or she can signpost you to something that will be more relevant. Now, quickly before we go, I want you to give us steps. Assuming there's somebody here who is grieving, for example, are there any quick steps that we could follow to at least relieve us until we book that session with you?
I think one of the most important things is to recognize that you have gone through something that is a big shock to you physically, mentally, and spiritually. Sometimes we underplay what we have been affected by, especially, it's like if you broke your leg, it's very obvious. You wouldn't expect to carry on as if life was just normal. So the first thing I would say is, look at your schedule and think of what can you delay, what can you delegate, or what can you delete, because you need space to be able to process what has happened. And you might, especially, such a big shock for Obie, that can really make it hard for you to even, focus on daily life and so on. The second thing I would say is, don't think that you have to be strong, you have to keep busy, you have to just wait, get some help. Tell people what it is that you need. People often want to help, but they're not sure how to help. And my third big tip is really about learning more about self-care. And that can be actually good for all of us, whether we've had a loss or not, because by learning more about self-care, we're actually building emotional resilience for tough times. So when the tough times come, we have some resources within us that can help us to. So I'm conscious that time is going on, but I do use the, I'm wondering if I've got time, but I do use.
I'll give you 10 more. I'll give us 10 more minutes.
Okay, I do use the acronym SAFER, because often when we've had a loss, depending on what it is and how it's happened, we feel uncertain, we feel unsafe. So doing specific things to build yourself up and comfort yourself are really, really important. So the S stands for senses. So think about what you're feeding your senses. And everybody is different. For me, the sense of smell, I know if I smell roses, that just lifts me up, calms me down, lifts me up. For other people, it might be other smells. For me, I find if I'm feeling a bit low, watching little baby videos, for some people it's cats or some other things. For some people, it might be reading or watching certain YouTube videos or worship songs. Or so you're thinking of your senses, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, and touch. And I suggest to people, get yourself a little bag. I call it an emotional care kit. So in my one, I've got a little rabbit. If I'm feeling stressed, I'll stroke it and it helps to calm me down. I've got my little hand cream from Marks and Spencer's with a lovely smell of roses. And you can put things in there that will actually, when you're feeling low, you go to your, what somebody called it, their happy bag. Because at the end of the day, it's where we put our attention. So currently, we've got a lot of distress going on with this whole Ukraine thing. Are you going to spend 24/7 watching the TV and feeding yourself that, which gets you more and more stressed? Or are you going to start thinking about, what am I feeding my senses? And for each person, it will be different things that lift you up, calm you down, comfort you. So think about that. A is for activities. Again, for people, some they might go walking or singing or cooking or crocheting, different activities that again can help to de-stress you, calm you down, and build you up. And so that's S, A. F is for friends. You need to have some friends that you train to just listen, to just sit with you, or to just comfort you, or just to bring you soup or whatever it is. Because the more you have somebody who can be your heart with ears, the more helpful it will be. So, identify and build. If you don't have someone, build, sort of work on building relationships. So that's friends. And then E is for environment. You need to create somewhere where you feel safe and comforted. And it could be some imaginary place. So I have an imaginary place where I can take myself to. We have a little stream in the park. There's a beautiful tree. It's sunshine. I can go and rest there. And it could be somewhere in your house, maybe a special chair or a special blanket or bed or whatever it is for you, but creating an environment where you feel safe so you can reflect and resource yourself. And then R is for resources. There are lots and lots of resources online in your community. So find out what they are that you can turn to. So those would be some practical tips I would offer.
Thank you, Gulam. I have some questions that I think I have to ask. I think they're very important, and the questions are open to Obie as well. Obie, so I have these questions that either you or Gulam can answer. So here it says here that also where one parent is ready to move on while the other is stuck, how do we find a common ground? So we have a situation where where there's a loss of a child, and the parent is ready to say, you know what, let's move on, and another parent is stuck. How do you deal with that even after many years? And then another question is, can a parent show too much grief in such a way that the other children begin to feel you loved their departed brother or sister more than them? How can you balance that as a parent?
So the first question, could you just repeat the first question again?
The first question is, where one parent is ready to move on while the other parent is still stuck, how can parents find the common ground?
So I think the key thing here is recognizing that each individual is on a unique journey and not to compare. Like the implication is that because one is ready to move on, they think the other one should be as well. And the reality is that because each one had a different relationship and we don't know what it is that's keeping them stuck. But the person who is struggling to move on definitely, needs to get some help, because time isn't going to heal it. If you're, like I said, if you've blown your tire and you just sit there waiting for it to reflate itself, you could wait for many years. So recognizing I'm struggling, I need to get some input, I need to get some help. And depending on what the issue is, it might vary as to what help that they need. And for some people, they might need to get somebody, they might need to invest in somebody who's trained to help with those things. For other people, some simpler resources and support might be enough. So everybody's different.
Okay. And Obie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think what she says is right. Everybody is different. Just everybody deals with things at their own time, in their own time. You can't both react to something as serious as that at the same speed or at the same, I don't know. So what she's saying is right, in that if you are the one that has moved on, you should have empathy for your spouse that isn't moving on quite as quickly. And if you're the spouse that is not able to move on as quickly, then you should, because you want to be at the same place, be eager to find help or resources that will help you come up. So
Fantastic.
Empathy and understanding, yes.
Yeah. And then can a parent show too much love? Can a parent show too much grief in such a way that all the children begin to feel that that the parent loves the departed child more? And how can they show balance?
Yes, because you know how it is. If you lose a child, there's this tendency, when you lose anybody, somebody said, have you ever been to a funeral where the person that dies is spoken, anybody speaks ill of the dead? So there's this pedestal we put for so many good reasons, those lost babies, miscarriages, children. Then these ones are growing up before you and are bound to do so much, take so many other wrong turns by virtue of where they are in life. So I have, over the years, you made conscious effort. It's just to keep bringing it before you, not to do that. It's just something, if you know that has a great, it can occur very easily and for very good reasons. You just have to guard yourself. And when you take those wrong turns, you come back.
Fantastic. I have one more minute, but I want to ask Obie this. So Obie, assuming there's a woman here who's experiencing the loss of a child, what are you going to say to her?
God loves you. God truly loves you regardless. And just let him hug you all the time. You'll be fine.
Wow. So, I don't want to stay more than one more minute. Gulam?
I think that was a very important last question. That can be a danger, and people only can do better when they know better. You've got to know what the impact is and find some way of keeping balance. I have some clients who felt that they lost their parent when there was a loss of a sibling, and that the parent was so devastated that they kind of withdrew into themselves. And she said, I just feel I didn't get the love and nurturing that I needed. So that is a danger to be aware of.
Oh, fantastic. So Gulam, thank you so much. And Gulam has her email address, gulam1uk@yahoo.co.uk. And if you want to get in touch with her, and if you have any questions, I'm going to put her details under the YouTube video, you can contact her or you can contact me as well. And I have some appreciations here. Someone says, thank you, Obie and Gulam. Another says, thanks so much, everyone. Thank you also, Obie and Gulam. And I want to say thank you for everyone for tuning in. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, it's Ibinabo Enebi. Please subscribe. And next week, I have another very interesting topic. And yes, so I'm going to see you next week. So until then, bye. Bye, everybody. Bye. Gulen and Obie, I'm going to call you right away. So thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you, everyone.